For $230 USD on the used market, and certain specs that still seem surprisingly solid, is the iPad Air 3 actually a little known bargain in 2024? Well, after 4 years of using the iPad Air 3 as a side device, I can tell you what holds up, what doesn't, and whether it's the right device for you. So first up, let's take a look at the design. The Air 3 is actually identical to the 2017 iPad Pro 10.5, but with some minor adjustments such as the lack of a protruding camera bump and top speakers. It's a super sleek, ultra portable and lightweight body at just 6.1mm thick and weighing in at 456 grams, although the sheer thinness of the aluminium shell does feel a little on the flimsy side, kind of like it's almost too thin. And when you press the home button, you can actually kind of feel the surface beneath the body of the iPad. In fact, some users have actually reported their iPad Air 3's bending over time, and if you've felt this iPad in your hands before, that'll probably not be that surprising to hear, but if you use a good solid case and don't sit on it, you should be fine. Now, the front of the Air 3 is definitely not from this decade, although the bezels are actually the thinnest ever on a home button iPad. The other home button iPads have much bigger bezels, whereas the Air 3/10.5-inch iPad Pro design is kind of like the perfect blend between the convenience of the home button and Touch ID and having that immersive all-screen view. And yes, the home button does of course pack Touch ID, which still works super fast on here being second generation, and you just barely have to brush your finger past the sensor for it to be recognized. Of course though, if you lean more towards the gesture system as seen on home buttonless iPads, you can always just swipe up to go home as well. On the bottom, we unfortunately get the old Lightning port, not USB-C, as this was a period when Apple had only just started to utilize USB-C on their highest end iPad Pros. USB-C didn't appear on lower tier iPads until the iPad Air 4 in 2020. So yes, you are getting a lot less flexibility with Lightning, but it's still going to be easy to find chargers for years to come. It's not ancient just yet, unlike the headphone jack at the top. Yep, this is pretty darn old school, but still nice to have there just in case you ever need it for nostalgia or even practical purposes. Speaking of audio though, the speakers on the bottom are very average. They get the job done, but the audio is pretty underwhelming. It's almost like it's got this unique false sense of bass, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you've ever owned one of these. On the side, there's the smart connector for connecting up things like smart keyboards, so worth knowing if you're going to be doing a bit of typing. But moving back to the front of the Air 3, we have our 10.5-inch display, which pretty much ticks all the boxes except for like two, which I'll get to. It's a 10.5-inch LCD Retina display with a resolution of 1668 by 2224 and pixel density of 264 pixels per inch. This display is still a pretty good all-rounder. It's immersive enough at 10.5 inches, not as immersive as a laptop, but you can still watch videos comfortably without carting around a flat screen TV. It's also super sharp, with no individual pixels being visible from a normal viewing distance, so everything still looks super crispy and colors pop out as well. Plus, this display is also compatible with the first generation Apple Pencil, which opens up a world of capability for digital artists or students who like to handwrite notes. The only area where it'll probably fall short in terms of actual necessities is that the screen only gets up to around 500 nits of brightness, so if you're outdoors in like direct sunlight, it can be hard to see what you're doing, but no problems with late afternoon or just indoor use. Apart from that though, for the average person, there's honestly nothing else wrong with this panel, and you should be super happy with it. If you're really into tech specs though, it does fall short in quite a few quote-unquote non-essential areas. For example, it's only LCD and not mini LED like on the new iPad Pros or even OLED, so you're not getting those deep true blacks, but rather a dark purpley shade from the backlight. Although, to be fair, only the most expensive iPad Pros have mini LED at this point. The rest still just have LCD, which in 2024 is kind of ridiculous. Plus, it's only 60Hz and not the buttery smooth ProMotion 120Hz displays that you get with tablets like the iPad Pros, so swiping and scrolling around is just not going to be as fluid. I mean, 60Hz doesn't look laggy in any way. It's extremely common. If you're watching this, chances are you've definitely owned a 60Hz phone before, so it's perfectly usable, but 120Hz is not only just usable, but actually pleasant to use. Swiping and scrolling around is just so much more buttery. So yeah, it's not the worst display out there. It gets the job done just fine, but it's not going to rock anyone's socks off, especially if you're into tech specs. But something that will undoubtedly rock your socks off is the money you'll save from switching to one of the value-packed 5G mobile plans on offer from today's video partner, Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile is currently the US's most popular mobile network, and after joining, you'll see exactly why. Unlike many other quote-unquote budget mobile brands, Mint doesn't sacrifice any speed, coverage, or data, whether you're playing intensive online games or simply browsing the web and sending emails. There's no difference in terms of any of those three things compared to mainstream providers. And plus, Ryan Reynolds owns the company, something you definitely can't flex about your current provider.
Hey there, it's Ryan Reynolds, owner of Mint Mobile. Enticing, right?
Plus, they've just announced that customers can get any of their plans for just $15 a month for 3 months, including their unlimited plan. And so if you're just sick, tired, and frustrated of paying so much for such an essential thing nowadays, head to the link in the description below to start taking advantage of this absolutely diabolical offer. And thanks to Mint being eSIM compatible, you can sign up for their service in less than 15 minutes. And so if that 15 minutes is worth the boatload of cash you'll save when you switch to Mint, head to the link below, you won't be disappointed. And thank you so much to Mint Mobile for partnering with me for this video. And now, let's take a look at the performance of the iPad Air 3. Is it as top of the line snappy as it was in 2019? Well, with the Apple A12 chipset and 3GB of RAM, it's not a slow iPad in 2024, but I wouldn't say it's lightning quick off the mark. I mean, it'll do the basics just fine with maybe a little bit of lag or hiccups here and there, things like browsing the web, watching YouTube, or sending emails, but intensive activity is getting to the point of simply being too much for the older processor. Things like certain Roblox games and split screening YouTube and Chrome at the same time can be pretty rough, not to mention draining the battery like a sink and heating up the aluminium shell diabolically, but you've got to expect that to some degree for the tablet's age, and honestly, if you're not super picky about it, it's perfectly fast enough for light to moderate activity and should continue to be for years ahead. Speaking of years ahead though, the iPad Air 3 is already 5 years old as of 2024, not to mention the internals already being a year older from 2018, and so just how long will this aging device be pleasantly usable into the future? Well, considering that the second generation iPad Air got an insane 8 years of updates from 2014 to 2022, I'm hoping that'll be the case for the Air 3. But keeping in mind that the specs were already a year old when the Air 3 came out, we can probably expect updates until around September 2026. The iPad 6th generation with the Apple A11 chipset may lose support this year, and then the Air 3 with the A12 will likely follow in either 2025 or 2026, but I'm placing my bets on 2026 since the Air 2 got that many updates. When the updates stop, apps slowly become less compatible with the older software version the device is stuck on over the next few years, before eventually it just becomes too incompatible and too buggy. But even after the updates stop, you should be able to get decent use out of it without too much trouble for the next couple of years or so. So yeah, it's not the greatest long-term solution. There have been many iPads released with countless changes since the Air 3, so it is starting to slip into that quote-unquote ancient realm, but it should be fine if you just need maybe something cheaper, but still pretty solid to get you through the next couple of years with the latest software. But if you're someone who doesn't upgrade for years and years, you'll probably want to look into something newer that has more years of updates and therefore more years of pleasant fluid use ahead. Now, before I touch on the battery life, let's quickly look at the camera setup on here. If you're like many, you probably don't really bat an eye at iPad cameras, but it's good to have decent enough cameras for things like FaceTiming and document scanning. The Air 3 packs a 7-megapixel rear camera and 5-megapixel selfie camera. The rear camera really isn't too good. It's pretty much the same sensor as on the iPhone 6 from 2014, if that gives you an idea of the quality. I mean, it does just fine for document scanning and video calling, etc., but it's not a camera you'd sort of want to use for daily photography. It gets the job done for the iPad-y stuff. The front-facing camera is also no improvement at 5 megapixels. I mean, yeah, again, FaceTiming works fine, but it's really bare bones quality. But it's really not that big of a deal since it's really only meant for quote-unquote practical use, not actual photography. Video is also in the same boat. It can be shot in up to 1080p at 30 frames per second, but it's really not what you'd call good video. Exposure is all over the place, there's no stabilization, so it's probably going to be quite shaky, and it's all in all just not really something you'd want to use on the daily for capturing memories. So yeah, not exactly the best of the best when it comes to cameras, but when it comes to things like, again, FaceTiming and document scanning, does the job just fine. And finally, moving on to the battery life on here, the Air 3 packs an 8134 mAh cell, which on paper seems like an absolute unit, but when you take into account the battery degradation over the years, it's a pretty different outcome. When I got the Air 3 in 2020, the battery was absolutely unkillable. It would just keep going and going all day, sometimes multiple days, but 4 years later, I'm sometimes struggling just to make it through until the evening, even if all I'm doing is typing documents, watching YouTube, or web browsing. I mean, the keyboard case I have definitely does use up more battery than normal due to the backlight, but even with light use, it definitely drains a lot faster than you'd normally expect, and heavy games are probably just as, if not more tolling, than using the keyboard case. Of course, this is to no fault of the iPad itself, all batteries degrade over time, and a battery replacement would definitely set things straight, so if you're buying refurbished and the battery is guaranteed to be new, it should easily last you long enough to get through the day, but just be careful if you're buying used off eBay and Facebook Marketplace, make sure you can get your money back if the battery does end up falling short. So yeah, if you're a light user and all you're doing is emails, web browsing, watching movies, with a healthy battery, you should get through the day just fine. But if you're playing a lot of heavy intensive games or using the split screen all day, then you'll probably want to look into something newer with better battery. And so with everything about the iPad Air 3 in 2024 now covered, it's pretty clear that while yes, it is a good deal for $230 or under on the used market, it's still a 5-year-old tablet, and a lot can happen in 5 years. It's missing a few bits of newer technology here and there, not to mention probably a degraded battery in a lot of examples, but for the price, it is pretty capable. Although the 2018 iPad Pro 11-inch can commonly be found from around $320 for a lower spec example, and around $400 for a top-end one, and the iPad Pro has a faster variant of the Apple A12 chipset, along with an all-screen design and 120Hz refresh rate, just to name a few upgrades. So honestly, if you can spend like $150 to $200 extra, you'll be getting a much more capable device that'll probably also get more updates on the Air 3 because of the A12X chipset. Of course, the Air 3 is still a good deal for the money, but if you want the absolute best value at around this price point, the first generation 11-inch iPad Pro is just leaps and bounds more capable in terms of both performance and features. But yeah, the iPad Air 3 has been a solid tablet for me over the past few years, and I probably won't be upgrading until the support runs out. If you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please make sure you drop me a like and subscribe to TechSpree for more reviews, insights, and the occasional unboxing. Also, if you'd like to have a stalk, my Instagram is at tech_spree and my Twitter is at techspree1. Thank you so much for watching. This is Tom with TechSpree, and I'll see you as always next time.